It's now my pleasure to introduce our speaker, Johanna Oosterwyk, and I will hand it over to her.
Thank you, Lauren. It's a pleasure to be here with you all. And I'm happy to share with you about some of those houseplant myths that particularly vex professional horticulturists. Let me share my screen and the PowerPoint slides I've prepared. As we get started, I am going to have a little bit of audience engagement. Those of you who are in the live audience, if you would just do me a favor and tell me about how you feel about some of these common myths. I'm going to start with really the one that kind of hurts us the most. Do rocks in the bottom of a pot improve drainage? A lot of people hear this. It's commonly recommended. Go ahead and click yes or no. What do you think? A couple of things to realize about planting. Roots from the media, yes, they get water, but they also get air. They need a balance of water and air in the media, and if the potting mix is too wet, roots won't be able to breathe. They need oxygen, just like you and I, and that's what they are getting out of the air in the potting mix. So go ahead, shouldn't take you too long. Just don't give it too much thought, and the moderators will collate those and share them with us. So do rocks in the bottom of a pot improve drainage? We're about 50-50 split, yes and no. Great results. Thank you so much. So when those pores are full of water, the media acts like a sponge and it gives you less room for air. The holes in the media, just like the holes in the sponge, are either full of water or they are full of air. You can tell when your sponge is full of water, and you can tell when a pot is full of water because it's heavier. Water is heavier than air. As I said, we want a balance of those two things. That's why we use a potting mix. That's one of the fundamental things that soil does for plants. You'll probably notice if you're working with a sponge, and feel free to play around with this at home if you are confused by anything that I'm saying, but gravity is going to pull the water to the bottom of the sponge. And within that sponge, you'll get kind of a gradation, like what is shown here in this excellent illustration. Gravity is going to pull that heavy water down to the bottom of the sponge, and gravity is going to pull the water down to the bottom of the pot. But just like a sponge, the media also has a pull on the water, and some of it stays in those pores. So up at the top of the pot or the top of the sponge, you get air-filled pores and drier media or sponge. And down at the bottom, even if you're holding it in your hand, you'll feel that it's just completely soaking wet down at the bottom. Soil scientists call that portion of the sponge or the soil, that fully saturated area at the bottom, a perched water table. Because if we just had water in air, it would fall fully down. But the action of that sponge and of that media is holding some water in. So you get a saturated zone where the pores are completely full of water and there's no room for air. It's called a perched water table. And that concept isn't really intuitive, but it's what's going on in the pot. And what that means is if you put gravel in your pot, you are moving that perched water table higher up, closer to the roots. That means that the roots are in that saturated zone where the holes in the media are full of water and there's no air for them to breathe. There's no oxygen for them. So gravity is going to pull that down, but a layer of gravel in the bottom of your pot, of rocks, is just going to raise up the level of the perched water table. Yes, the pores in a layer of gravel are bigger, so there should be more air, and there is more air in that layer of gravel. But because of the difference in pore size and the difference of texture between the pores in the gravel and the pores in the potting mix, the water doesn't move freely from one to the other. It becomes more like just holding that sponge up in the air, and the sponge, the perched water table stays at the bottom of the sponge. So in effect, this is not a good idea. Don't put gravel in the bottom of your pot if you want to improve the drainage. It simply reduces the overall volume of the potting mix and moves the saturated zone where there is no oxygen in the media closer to the roots, suffocates the roots and causes root rot, and ultimately root death, poor health. It's one of the reasons that overwatering is the primary cause of plant death in houseplants. We love our plants, we want them to have the water that they need, but we forget that they also need to breathe. What can you do to improve drainage? One option is a deeper pot. Move that saturated zone further down. Again, gravel will not do that because that will move the saturated zone further up and closer to the roots. If you do want to use gravel, put it outside of the pot. When you have your plants sitting, you can probably see this if you have container pots sitting on a patio, or if you have dishes under your pots so that tables and floors don't get all wet when you water them. You never want to leave your plant sitting in water. So putting rocks into that drainage tray will again lift the soil up out of that saturated zone. It allows the pot to drain, but then the roots don't have to sit soaking wet in that wet zone. So put rocks in the dish, or if you have a decorative pot around a pot with holes, make sure that you can put either some pot shards, some little pieces of broken clay pots underneath that, something to lift it up above the surface that it's standing on. You'll notice that if you have one of those pot dishes, it has little ridges to it. That's to keep suction from happening, and that's to improve the drainage. You can see that the pot I have pictured here has a little cutout where the drainage holes are. You always want to make sure that your containers have those drainage holes so that the water can get out, but adding rocks inside will not improve the drainage. Unglazed clay pots also dry out faster. Now the water doesn't drain down through the force of gravity, but an unglazed clay pot is porous and water will evaporate from the sides. So here in the greenhouse, we pot all of our succulent plants into clay pots. Again, it just reduces the water stored within that sponge of the soil. A coarser media can also help to improve drainage. Most potting mixes are about 15 to 20% particulates, perlite, the little white specks in your potting mix. And that's there to fluff up and create larger pores within the potting mix. Mixing gravel or rocks into your potting mix, again, it's not really going to make a difference. It's going to give you rocky soil. So you want to use something relatively small or fine like perlite or coarse sand, and increase the percent of that in your media to 25 to 30%. So again, for cactus in the greenhouse, because we want coarser media, we use about a 3-to-1 or 2-to-1 proportion of a standard potting mix and add in some coarse sand or additional perlite to help improve the drainage and reduce the water that is held within the container. And that's the goal that we're going for. Another survey for you quick. You might be saying, but I have instructions for a terrarium and it says start with gravel on the bottom, right? The instructions say, and I want to follow those instructions. So my question here is that a good idea? Do you want to put gravel at the bottom of a terrarium? So you've all had a chance to look at the quiz. What is your answer? Yes, it's a good idea. About, I would say, 2 to 1 is the 75 to 28%. Great, thank you for answering that question for me. An important thing to point out, terrariums lack drainage holes. Typical houseplant pot, you want it to have drainage holes. If you have a pretty pot that doesn't have holes in it, you're either going to want to add holes or use that as a decorative housing for another container that does have drainage. But because terrariums, well, just based on the way that they are designed, they don't have drainage. We have to take that into account. So for a terrarium, again, here it depends. Do you have an open terrarium where there's no closed lid, sometimes called a dish garden? These will dry out, and you want to plan to water those regularly, as their water is going to evaporate and transpire, and it's not going to stay there. For an open terrarium or a dish garden, yes, you want to add a drainage layer because you need to prevent that overwatering. It doesn't have drainage holes, so you have to create something for it. So do use that drainage layer. Put a fiber barrier between your gravel or whatever your chunky rocks in the bottom and the media so that the media doesn't trickle down into the gravel, and then you just end up with water in your media again. So yes, for an open terrarium or a dish garden, I would say yes, do use that drainage layer. But for a closed terrarium, one where it's completely sealed up and you're not planning to add more water, we make these often in the greenhouse with students, and we just say go ahead and put the soil there in the bottom because you're not watering regularly. And this whole interior environment is going to come to a sort of humid equilibrium. And I don't recommend putting rocks in the bottom because I run out of space. You could absolutely do it, follow those instructions, but I find that every additional layer in the bottom eats up the space that I want to have for my plants. So in a closed terrarium, it's optional. Many of us love succulents. Here's another quick question for you. What about my succulents? Can I put those into a terrarium? So go ahead and quickly answer that question for me. Some things about succulents: cactus and other succulent plants come from dry, sunny climates like deserts. And plants do best when we match their environment to their native home habitat. So how did that quiz go? Will succulents thrive in terrariums? And our results switched the other way. We have about a third saying yes, they will, and 2/3 saying no. Thank you so much. Well, think about what that environment is like inside the terrarium. You have warm temperatures, you have moist air, and because the plants are inside an additional layer of glass, you have even less light than you do in your home. Warm temperatures, moist air, and low light. And what did we just say cactus like? Lots of light and dry. Inside of a terrarium is not a good location for a cactus. What are the best terrarium plants? Small tropical understory plants. In fact, most of our typical house plants do come from shady tropical areas where it's warm, humid, and shady. Some of my favorite terrarium plants that are, again, on the small side are Photonia. That's the red veined plant in the picture on the right. Ferns are excellent. They love the moisture and they don't mind the shade inside of a terrarium. There are some lovely tiny leaved pilea that work well. And air plants love that moisture that they get from the air, and they like the additional protection. Here I will give you a hard and fast rule. Never put succulents in a closed terrarium. You can put them into an open terrarium or a dish garden, like that picture in the middle where I've got the air plant, but you'll absolutely want to add that drainage layer and be careful with watering. Cactus, they get recommended as houseplants, but it is a myth that they are impossible to kill. Cactus grow and die very slowly, so it can be a long time before you realize that you have harmed your plant. But when you're thinking about where to put your plant, think about where it came from. What conditions is it adapted to? And take that into account when you plan your houseplant plantings. I'm going to transition into a different type of myth. Answer this question for me. Can you make effective pest controls at home? We get a lot of home recipes, recommendations for people. Can you use items you have around the house to control for pests and diseases in your home? Common recipes will often include essential oils and sometimes dish soaps. What do you think? Go ahead and show me the results on that quiz. A lot of you answered yes, just a few answered no. Okay, but some very confident answers there. Thank you so much. Well, it's true that many plants do make their own pest control compounds. Some plant compounds are commonly used in pesticides. You've probably heard about neonicotinoids. Well, they're based on nicotine from the tobacco plant, which tobacco creates as a pesticide to control pests on itself. Neonicotinoids are a synthetic version of that natural product. Cinnamon oil, rosemary, mint, and hot peppers all make compounds that are intended to keep bugs away, basically. They either act as a killer or simply as a repellent. But the effectiveness of these compounds varies. It varies depending on the pest itself. If you're dealing with mealybugs or whiteflies or spider mites or thrips, not all pests are susceptible to all products. And it also varies on the product. So matching those two up can be complex. So I have here the results of a test that was done by a colleague of mine at Kansas State. And it shows you the results and the effectiveness of some of these essential oils on, in this case, arthropod pests. The graph on the left is mealybugs, and it shows percent mortality. So the taller the bar, the more bugs were killed by this compound. And then along the bottom, it shows you all of the different compounds that they used to control those pests. So on the left, again, is mealybug mortality, and there's quite a few different options, things that did, in fact, kill many of the mealybugs that were on the plants. And on the right is whitefly mortality. At the far right of each graph, those are controls. UTC is the untreated control. They didn't do anything. And the water control is they just sprayed it with water to see if that had any effect. But clearly, while a lot of the compounds they tested were effective on mealybugs, really there wasn't much impact on whiteflies. That one really tall column there, the MGIS, that's Monterey Garden and Insect Spray, and it's not an essential oil. It's actually spinosad, which is also a naturally occurring compound, but it's not something you could get over the counter. So what I want to show you here, though, is that the effects vary, both between the pests and between the products. Some of these natural compounds will kill bugs, but others will only act as a repellent. And you can see the label of this pesticide that I have here. This is a natural product that has rosemary oil in it. And I am working to evaluate this for greenhouse use right now. Really just personally, I'm not writing up anything on it. I just want to see if it is something we could add to the compounds that we use in the greenhouse. Again, it depends on the pest and the product, whether or not it is going to act as a repellent or as something that will kill it. And honestly, for many of these, it's best to just go ahead and use trial and error. Test the product or the recipe before you use it extensively. This product claims to repel and control spider mites, whiteflies, fungus gnats, thrips, aphids, and many other common problems. This is a leaf of a plant that I treated 5 days ago with that rosemary oil product. And you can see, even though spider mites are on the label as something that it repels and controls, they're still quite happy on this leaf. So that was unfortunate. I was hoping for better results than that. And you can see that's the spider mite. And something else to point out is right next to that spider mite, the little sphere is a mite egg, something that will later hatch into another spider mite. And I'm pointing out that egg because it's an important part of my equation for whether or not this is an effective control. Essential oils are attractive because they do break down quickly. They won't linger on the plant, but that's good for us. They don't stay in the environment, but not necessarily great for control because you have to use them. They're effective when they are either wet or right after, and then the effects go away. So because of that, you may have to have multiple treatments. So repeating a treatment is often going to be necessary. Also, pests like to hide in tight spaces. To get that video I showed you, I really had to pull apart the plant here, and there's a picture in the bottom corner of what that plant is. Some of you may recognize it. I mean, I won't say it's not a common houseplant, but I had to really tear into the plant to find those spider mites that I put on the video. That's a good sign. It shows me that the ones that were out and about on the leaves did get killed by it, and probably what is left are the ones that were hiding and didn't come in contact with the oil before it degraded. But the other thing is that there are resistant life stages. That egg of the spider mite probably wasn't affected at all, which means that those eggs are going to hatch, and you will need to repeat those treatments every so often in order to kill the pests. This is another video that I took just this morning. So the first video you saw, I took yesterday. And now this morning, I really had to hunt for pests yesterday. This morning, if you look at this screen, I easily counted 7 mites within my field of vision without tearing the plant apart and without increasing the magnification at all. So just kind of change your focus around the screen, and there are quite a few mites on there. So either ones that have hatched or ones that have come out of hiding. The other thing that I look for when I test a product is its effect on the plants. Many of these oils have harsh effects on plants. We call this phytotoxicity, phyto for plant and then toxic effects. So phytotoxicity shows up on the flowers, as you can see on the left, and in damage to the leaves, as you can see on the right. These are not the product with rosemary oil that I was testing. These are other compounds I've used in the past. I just pulled them out of my, my log. Natural doesn't always mean harmless. So when you're considering using some of these natural products, test them out first. This is a damage rating. The higher the column, the more damage that product had on the plant. So again, this is some effects of commercially available plant-derived essential oil products. Bang is made of piperaceae. It's got black pepper powder in it. FVIS had rosemary, cinnamon, clove, and garlic oil. And that Pest Out product, the other tall column, had cottonseed oil, clove, and garlic. And this is damage to the flowers of Gerbera daisies. So natural doesn't always mean harmless. Definitely test a product before you use it. Before I leave, I will give you one recipe that I will recommend to you. I ran this one by PJ Leash, our state entomologist. A mild dishwashing liquid in a gallon, 1 tablespoon in a gallon of water. Shake that well and spray thoroughly to cover the pests. It doesn't have a residue. It works as a insecticidal soap. It's contact insecticide, so it will only kill pests that it comes in contact with, but you can repeat as needed every 7 to 10 days. You don't have to worry about human toxicity, and it can do a good job of killing a wide range of pests, both insect and mites in the greenhouse. So I've hopefully left just a little bit of time for some of your questions. And thank you all for listening to my talk.
Thank you so much, Johanna. Yes, we can answer a few questions, I think. Thank you everyone for being here. We do have a survey that Lauren has linked into our chat. It will also pop up when we close down the webinar in just a little bit. So some questions for you, Johanna. One is about watering. You know, sometimes we hear it's better to water from the bottom versus watering from the top at the soil level. What do you recommend?
If you can water from the bottom, that works really well, especially for plants like African violets that can be susceptible to cold damage. Cold water on the leaves of an African violet can cause spotting. And if you can water from the bottom, go ahead and do that, but make sure that you are able to drain away all the water. Don't leave the plants in standing water for more than 30 minutes to an hour. You want to make sure that it does drain away. So if you can set up a wicking system, or if you can soak the pot and then, completely drain it, but that can be a lot more work than just top watering.
Great. I hear a lot in my work about people using home remedies, so I'm going to circle back to that since you were just talking about these home remedies. People might try spraying milk on their plants or Pam cooking spray because it's been said to repel pests and things like that. I see a lot of people using neem oil. So again, some of these other things that might not be these essential oil based or products that you buy that maybe people are trying to make at home, vinegar solutions and things like that. Any comments about those types of things?
Yeah, definitely. So it can be hard to tease apart, and it's hard to find really good references, which is why I went to my friend Ray Cloyd's work. It can be hard to tease those out, and I honestly wouldn't share that paper because it's very hard to organize. But I would test a small area, and in general, something like Pam cooking spray is going to be too concentrated. You're talking about, like I said, a tablespoon of soap in a gallon of water. So that Pam cooking spray is going to be far more of the product than you need. And it's also, if you are just using that spray in the aerosol bottle, it's not going to be a pure oil ingredient. It's going to have other things in it, surfactant, something to help it spread. So either, test to make sure that none of those other products are going to hurt your plant, and be aware that you're not just getting that. Now, Pam cooking spray is probably just a typical vegetable oil, which is canola oil, but in that spray bottle form, it's going to be too concentrated. You would want to dilute that before you sprayed it on a plant. As far as using milk, Julie, you're going to hate this. There is some evidence that milk products will kill mildew, not insect or mite pests, so not arthropods, but there is some evidence that it is a deterrent for things like powdery mildew. But again, we don't just spray milk. We might take a couple of tablespoons of powdered milk in a gallon of water, that sort of thing. I don't have a good recipe for that on hand. But the other thing to be aware of is that, as I said, these are going to degrade in the environment, and you are going to smell sour milk on your houseplants if you go that way. I would honestly, if you have a mite problem, it's funny to say I have a favorite pesticide, but I have a pesticide that is cinnamaldehyde, which is cinnamon oil. And I know when I've used it because the greenhouse smells like cinnamon for about a day afterward. However, it has high phytotoxicity. I have to be very careful what I spray it on. I use it for powdery mildew and mites, but I can't use it on clover. I've learned that I know most people don't keep houseplants. Clover is a houseplant, but we have a lot of them because there's a lot of research done in the greenhouse with forages. And I have toasted so many clover plants with cinnamon oil. I finally learned not to do that and to pay attention to what I was spraying in the first part. So
Thank you so much for all this great advice.